How often have Western historians asserted that, apart from ancient Kemet, now known as Egypt, there were no stone structures to be found south of the Sahara? We aim to demonstrate conclusively that the construction of stone structures in Africa extends far beyond the medieval period, establishing that Africa was, in fact, a pioneer in developing stone architecture for human habitation. This assertion challenges the often narrow portrayal of African history and architectural achievements. Evidence of stone construction in Africa predates many of the world's ancient civilizations, illustrating that African societies were not only utilizing stone in their building practices, but were also leading innovators in creating sophisticated, permanent dwellings and communal spaces from this durable material. Adam's calendar, not surprisingly dubbed the African Stonehenge. Although it predates Stonehenge by tens of thousands of years. Adam's calendar is regarded as the oldest man-made structure in the world. Situated in Mpumalanga, South Africa, this stone circle measures about 30 meters in diameter and is believed to be over 75,000 years old, making it far older than both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza. The site is celebrated for its astronomical alignments and is considered one of the only fully functional, largely intact megalithic stone calendars known today. Originally documented by English explorer Theodore Bent in 1891, who estimated about 4,000 ruins, this number was revised to 20,000 by 1974. And today, researcher Michael Tellinger suggests there could be up to 100,000. These structures, often connected by networks mistaken for roads, form a vast grid and are surrounded by extensive ancient agricultural terraces. The site, known to local Africans elders as the birthplace of the sun, or Inzalo Yelanga, was brought to public attention in 2003 by South African pilot Johan Heine. He discovered the site quite by accident after a rescue mission for a crashed pilot near the area. Heine noticed large stones, arranged with precise astronomical alignment to the cardinal points and seasonal cycles. This observation led to the conclusion that the stones were part of a sophisticated calendar system. Adam's calendar is not just an ancient timekeeping device, but a large circular stone arrangement with two prominent upright stones at its center, visible from aerial images. The stones, composed of dolomite weighing up to 5 tons each, are believed to have been transported from a distance. Interestingly, the area around the calendar is rich in gold, historically attracting mining operations, as indicated by nearby ancient and modern mines. The site's age was initially calculated by examining the orientation of the Orion constellation, which appears to align with the calendar stones every 26,000 years, due to the precession of the Earth's axis. Further studies, including the analysis of erosion patterns on the stones, have supported estimates that place the site's creation at least 75,000 to 160,000 years ago. Adam's calendar continues to be a focal point of intrigue, raising questions about the capabilities and knowledge of its African builders, their civilization, and the true purpose of this enigmatic stone structure. In the heart of southeastern Africa lies an ancient city of stone. Great Zimbabwe, a monumental testament to Africa's rich past, is a mystery that has captivated explorers and historians. Over 1,600 years ago, the Kalanga, also known as Karanga people, began building what would emerge as the most impressive civilization in ancient southern Africa. In the 19th century, European colonizers forcefully entered southern Africa. Venturing further inland, they encountered Zimbabwe's expansive stone structures. Astonished by these constructions, they immediately concluded that such architectural feats could not possibly have been accomplished by what they deemed an inferior race. This marked the start of a deliberate distortion of Zimbabwe's history, with claims that the civilization's achievements were the work of various fictional white ancestors. In 1871, German explorer Karl Mauch infamously stated, "The city was not built by Africans, as the construction style is too sophisticated. It must have been the work of Phoenician or Jewish settlers." Once imagined as a lost outpost of biblical proportions, this grand site was thought to connect directly to tales of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Such legends were fueled by the writings of João de Santos, a Portuguese missionary who, in 1609, linked these magnificent ruins with storied biblical narratives. Set against the backdrop of a mythical African city associated with King Solomon, the 1885 adventure novel King Solomon's Mines explores one of the legends surrounding the origins of Great Zimbabwe. This description is for a 1937 movie poster, one of multiple adaptations of the novel into film. This 1938 travel poster, showcasing the conical tower and a stone bird, perpetuates the myth that Great Zimbabwe was somehow linked to the biblical Queen of Sheba. The image of an African man kneeling before the spectral figure of the Queen illustrates the colonial-era belief in the site's non-African origins, a reflection of the period's racial prejudices. Yet, as European colonizers laid claim to African lands, driven by a blend of greed and racial prejudice, the true origins of Great Zimbabwe's sophisticated stone structures were obscured by tales of exotic realms and foreign builders. In 1890, Cecil Rhodes, a British financier, took control of Mashonaland, a part of northern present-day Zimbabwe, through the British South Africa Company, aiming to colonize the area. Intrigued by Great Zimbabwe, Rhodes funded excavations to discover treasures and gather knowledge. Theodore Bent, supported by prestigious British institutions like the Royal Geographic Society and the British Association for the Advancement of Science, led these initial scientific excavations. Initially dismissive of the African interior's archaeological value, Bent changed his perspective upon discovering striking stone-carved birds atop pillars, which resembled artifacts from ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern civilizations. Consequently, Bent concluded that the ruins were built by Arabs, not Africans. Richard Hall, a journalist appointed by Cecil Rhodes, oversaw Great Zimbabwe from 1901 to 1904, leaving a detrimental mark on its history. Hall's aggressive restoration methods led to the destruction of valuable archaeological evidence. We would like to remind viewers of similar so-called restorative efforts in Kemet, or what is now called Egypt, where images of our ancestors have sometimes been repainted to fit racist colonial narratives. Let's continue. In his report to Rhodes, Hall echoed the earlier verdict of Bent, suggesting that the ruins were constructed by he called a civilized race from the Arab or Near Eastern regions. Hall's actions, along with those of Bent and others, solidified the false narrative of Great Zimbabwe's non-African origin as its official history. During this period, Africans were barred from accessing these sites for their spiritual practices. The racist colonial government went as far as to imprison any researchers who argued for the African origins of these structures. It wasn't until the end of apartheid, in what was then southern Rhodesia, that the rightful history was restored to the Karanga people and Africa as a whole. The term Zimbabwe is derived from the Shona phrase Zimbadzamabwe, which translates to houses of stone, referring to the stone-built structures found at the archaeological site of Great Zimbabwe. The genesis of Zimbabwe as the new name for Rhodesia came with the nation's formal independence from British rule. Before independence, the country was known as Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes, a British imperialist whose British South Africa Company colonized the region in the late 19th century. The name Rhodesia itself was a symbol of colonial dominance and the suppression of the native African population. Robert Mugabe, a key figure in the Zimbabwean independence movement, and later the Prime Minister and President of Zimbabwe, played a significant role in renaming the country. The choice of the name Zimbabwe was motivated by a desire to reclaim cultural identity and heritage, and to signify a break from colonial rule. Managed by the Zimbabwean government as a national monument, Great Zimbabwe was recognized by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in 1986 as a World Heritage Site, celebrating its distinct and significant contribution to cultural and archaeological heritage. The Karanga, who are part of the broader Shona group that constitutes the majority of Zimbabwe's population, have a fascinating origin story. It is believed that they migrated from the Great Lakes region and encountered the Khoisan, who were called Bushmen by colonizers. Historian Louise-Marie Diop-Mace stated that the Karanga could trace their origins to Sudan, particularly after the decline of the powerful pharaonic empire of Barua, when builders reportedly migrated south, bringing their architectural techniques with them. The Karanga developed a rich cultural life, marked by intense religious practices dedicated to Mwari, God, and Mudzimu, ancestors, and harnessed the region's abundant mineral resources, which played a key role in their rise to prominence in southern Africa. About 1600 years ago, they constructed the formidable fort of Mahanwa, Acropolis Hill, which predates the oldest fortified castles in Europe by 600 years. It is worth noting that the first fortified castles were built in Kemet. Subsequently, during the Moorish civilization, the Black Berbers of the Maghreb in Spain introduced the concept of fortified castles to Europe. We discussed this in a recent video. The unique geological feature of granite, which naturally splits through a process known as exfoliation, played a crucial role in the construction of Great Zimbabwe. This natural splitting occurs due to the temperature variations between warm days and cool nights, causing the rock to fracture into flat-sided slabs about 3 to 7 inches thick. The inhabitants of the area developed techniques to accelerate this process by heating the granite surfaces with fire and then rapidly cooling them with water. Great Zimbabwe is an expansive archaeological site covering about 1,800 acres, which experts have categorized into 3 main sections: the hill, the valley, and the outer city. Visitors to the site are first struck by the hill, a prominent feature that rises 260 feet above the landscape. Its peak is adorned with various rock formations, and the area is characterized by a series of walls weaving through natural rock outcrops and boulders, forming a labyrinth of narrow passageways and small enclosures. Most archaeologists today believe that the hill was the seat of royal power in Great Zimbabwe. Just beyond the hill area of Great Zimbabwe lies the valley, which features around a dozen enclosures, each either completely or partially surrounded by stone walls. The highlight of the valley section is the Great Enclosure. This impressive oval-shaped area is enclosed by a massive wall stretching 800 feet in length, reaching up to 32 feet in height, and varying up to 17 feet in thickness. The wall is designed to be thicker at the base, tapering as it rises, which enhances its stability. Alongside the main wall runs an inner wall, creating a narrow, deep passageway between them. This passage leads to the enclosure's most notable feature, the conical tower. This striking, solid, cone-shaped structure stands 30 feet tall and spans 18 feet across at its base. Beyond the valley enclosures lies the outer city, the most mysterious part of Great Zimbabwe. Historically, this area was densely populated, home to the majority of the settlement's residents. Today, it primarily features remnants of daka, or clay, huts, with a few stone enclosures dotted across the landscape. After a thorough examination of the site, archaeologist Huffman estimated that, at its height, Great Zimbabwe could have supported up to 18,000 people, establishing it as a significant urban center in medieval southern Africa. In 2002, astronomer Richard Wade proposed that Great Zimbabwe's layout was based on astronomical principles, mirroring the constellation Orion and marking the solstices. This connection recalls the sacred significance of Orion to the ancient Egyptians, who aligned the 3 stars of Orion with the 3 great pyramids, which also mark the solstices. This suggests that the Karanga possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge and, like their African ancestors. The Great Zimbabwe era marked a time of flourishing economic activity, primarily driven by extensive industrial operations in the region. Archaeologists have discovered nearly 4,000 sites where iron, gold, copper, and tin were processed, with one site alone yielding an estimated 30,000 tons of tin. The era also saw significant production of ceramics and bronze. Contrary to a prevalent misconception in the West, often used to justify the appropriation of our resources, we have long recognized and skillfully exploited the value of our mineral wealth, well before European intervention. Great Zimbabwe was deeply integrated into international trade networks, engaging in commerce with Asia and the Arab Muslim world. The port of Solafa in Mozambique was a crucial hub, where mineral resources and ivory were exported by Arab and African sailors across the seas. This vibrant trade was a key economic force not only for Great Zimbabwe, but also for the entire East African coast, notably enriching the Swahili civilization of Tanzania and Kenya. In Great Zimbabwe, numerous artifacts, such as gold and copper items, Chinese porcelain, and Syrian beads, have been found. Similar to discoveries at other regional sites like Mapungubwe in South Africa and Ignombe Ilede in Zambia. As centuries unfolded, European mapmakers, influenced by ancient tales, occasionally depicted imaginary cities or castles on their maps of southeastern Africa, alongside fanciful sea monsters and whirlpools. By the 19th century, European missionaries and settlers began migrating northward onto the Zimbabwe plateau from what is now South Africa. A German missionary named Alexander Merensky, fascinated by stories of a vast, ruined stone city in the interior, speculated that it could be Ophir, a city linked to the biblical accounts of Solomon and Sheba. Inspired by Merensky, Karl Mauck, a German geologist in pursuit of fame and fortune, set out in 1871 to find these ruins, which he referred to as Old Monomotapa or Ophir in his diary. Dressed in antelope hide and carrying a large umbrella, several guns, and over 50 pounds of gear, including books and painting equipment, Mauck ventured into Mashonaland. There, he met an ivory dealer, Adam Renders, who claimed knowledge of the ruins. With Renders and a local guide's help, Mauck located Great Zimbabwe. However, he found neither gold nor jewels, nor any inscriptions to shed light on the builders or history of the site. By 1905, archaeologist David Randall McIlver had begun to challenge the prevailing myths and racial biases surrounding Great Zimbabwe. After meticulous examination, he declared the ruins to be unquestionably African in every detail. Despite the accuracy of his findings, the white colonial powers dismissed his conclusions. The majority were unwilling to acknowledge the possibility of a sophisticated and formidable civilization in Black Africa, finding alternative explanations more palatable. As a result, a variety of imaginative theories flourished, attributing the origins of Great Zimbabwe to ancient Egyptians, shipwrecked Vikings, and even the mythical lost civilization of Atlantis. Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.